Okay, so hello everyone, good evening. I am Vasudevan from the Eco Finance cluster. We have gathered here for today's roundtable in collaboration with the Public Policy cluster. We'll be discussing about free market regulation. So free market regulation has been a topic of debate for a long period of time, and many experts have a different point of view on the definition of what is a free market. Before that, let us know what does a free market mean. So a free market has been defined as a system where the prices of goods and services are determined by the supply and demand for the goods and services itself. So let's begin the debate by finding the answer for the first question, and that is, what is free market regulation according to you? So the floor is yours. Go ahead, please.
Can I start?
Yes, please. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, like to first understand what free market regulation is, we first need to know what free market is. And as you mentioned, the most simple definition is it's a market where buyers and sellers just buy and sell goods or services without any sort of government intervention. And again, the prices are decided by supply and demand. In introductory economics, we are taught this concept of laissez-faire, where it requires no sort of government intervention and just things run its course. So we could say this concept is synonymous to that. And essentially, free market regulation is the rules and laws that essentially regulates the free market. Now, technically, capitalist economy should be a free market. However, that is very hypothetically speaking. In the real world, it might be paradoxical, but any sort of free market economy always have some sort of government intervention. Otherwise, things can go kind of crazy. It's sometimes required because, um, let's say, in order to maximize competition, right? Because you want to have a step up from the competition, the companies might not have the best interest of the public in mind. So, for various reasons such as that, I feel like government regulation and free market regulation could be extremely necessary.
Great point, Risha.
Adding on to
Go ahead, please.
adding on to that point, free market regulation, uh, apart from government intervention, we actually witness other international organizations as well. And free market in itself is not a bad idea, but what if there is a market failure? And that can be caused by sellers or buyer concentration, or by free riders who benefit from these free market standpoint of view. So to regulate this market failure, because then it's upon the government to understand how to tackle these situations. The government itself, like in the case of India, regulates a chunk of it, so that at the end the responsibility is on the whole market, or not just the governments. And hence we have sectoral regulators as well. It's just an offshoot of market regulations in itself. So I think that free market is apparently, yes, it's the result of demand and supply curves. How is it regulated? But when it comes to regulation, we have governments and international organization, and I think to some extent in international markets we have NGOs which also kind of regulate these markets.
Shreya or Samya, do you want to add something to the points?
Right. I think someone touched upon this I think it was Rishabh who touched upon it very briefly, that free market is a term that usually goes hand in hand with capitalism. While this is the case, it's important to make the important distinction that they are distinct. They're not exactly the same thing. Capitalism is an economic system that determines how the means of production are organized. So you have private business owners who are capitalists, and they own all of the means of production and control the amounts of profits that are received based on the goods and services. Now, these capitalists hire workers in return for wages or salaries. And the workers do not own any of these means of production. Now, a free market, on the other hand, is much different in terms of its distribution and allocation of goods and services, because it doesn't rely on a group of people like the capitalists. It is supply and demand, which means it's produced via price discovery. So a free market is determined through competition and via the setting and accepting or rejection of a Hello.
Yeah, go ahead, Shreya. We actually lost you. Yeah.
Just a very second. Did you catch my point all the way until free markets?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, your voice was breaking a little bit. So you can finish your point. So go ahead.
Yeah. So it was just essentially that while the two terms are used together, free market does not actually mean capitalism. While free markets are part of capitalism, the two concepts are not the same. Capitalism does not essentially just have free markets like many people believe. That's not essentially the case. So there's an important distinction, really a theoretical distinction that we have to make from the beginning.
Great. So Rishabh, do you want to add any more points?
Oh, hello. Yeah, no, totally. I totally get the distinction between that. And yeah, for sure, for sure. It's important to clarify that in the beginning of the discussion itself. And thank you for adding that point.
Great. Great points raised by all of you. Okay, so now that we actually found the answer for the first question, so let us move on to the second question, and that is, what are some examples of free market regulations? So, Soumya or Sanya, do you want to speak up something?
Yeah, so I feel two examples of free market regulation that began with the best of intentions were extensive regulation of railroads and airlines, which inhibited innovation and protected rivals at the expense of consumers, and they also kept the prices high. So in late 19th and early 20th centuries, extensive regulation was imposed on railroads, especially in the US, to prevent discrimination and ensure fair access. However, these regulations often led to rigid pricing structures and they hindered innovation.
Okay. Go ahead, Chetan.
So I would like to answer this question by referring back to the first question of why is there free market regulation in the first place if free market inherently means that the price is to be determined by the demand and supply mode. So why is there a need for regulation? So here I would like to give an example of antitrust laws, which is essentially what the evils that come out of free market, that tend to do come out of free market, are tried to be mitigated through such regulations. Antitrust laws prevent the existence of monopolies and prevent such and promote competition so that a free market will continue to exist rather than the price being completely skewed towards one side. Similarly, there are other laws which are protecting customers, that those are consumer protection laws. And such laws will ensure that stakeholders, such as consumers in this case, would have accurate information perhaps about products and would have accurate recourse. Similarly, in India, we can see the Environmental Protection Act, which is also which is to protect and address pollution and environmental degradation, and not forget about another essential thing, essentially, in the garb of a free market. So those are a few examples that I had to give.
Great point raised by you. Go ahead, Soumya.
Yeah, so I think another example that I think of when I think of the regulation of free markets is that which is centered around the environment. So basically, there are certain regulations in the market that have been inculcated now based on the environmental needs. and one of them was this European Union's emission trading system that was adopted a couple of years ago, because it sets a cap on the greenhouse emissions and allows industries to buy and sell emission allowances. This is one of the measures that has been taken in place and is affecting a lot of demand and price mechanisms, which are not in favor of the consumers, say because essentially the cost of production has increased because of this. But I think such regulations which are not in favor of the consumer are also in favor of the consumer. Like in terms of the long-term effects that it might have. So I think there are certain regulations in the market that in the short run don't seem to be doing a lot of benefit, but in the long run that they might reap great results.
Yeah.
I would like to add some other examples. Another one could be about health and safety regulations. For example, in India, we have FSSAI, which is Food Safety and Standards Regulation. The organization basically sets food for the food safety and quality, ensuring that the food products meet safety requirements. We already know the meaning of free market and why is it important to regulate that. And continuing that, other area is, as I mentioned, health and safety. Then we have land use and zoning regulations, and then we have contract and commercial law. These could be new examples as well.
Yes. Rishabh, go ahead.
Mostly all of the things that had to be discussed have been covered over here. And just to add to what Aina had to say, in the context of India, as she mentioned, FSSAI is there to regulate the food quality, right? There is also, and as Chetan added, there is a whole Environmental Protection Act to like ensure the environmental impact by the different companies, the carbon footprint, and all of that stuff. There is also SEBI, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, which regulates the securities market. Or we can take RBI. In fact, they're overseeing all the monetary policies and all of that. So yeah, that's it.
Yes, so great points raised by you. So like even if I were to add, at least from a business perspective, I would say that the Competitions Act of 2002 and the Consumer Protection Act of 1986 are the the biggest example of free market regulation. And to go further deeper into that, I would say that the Competition Commission of India had actually fined Reliance Jio for using predatory tactics to gain consumers. So this is the biggest example of of that law coming into force in India. So this could be the
another prominent example that I could think of is the intellectual property regulation, which is we have Patents Act, we have Copyrights Act, and we have Trademarks Act in the 1919 protecting intellectual property rights in India. So that could be another example here.
Yes. So does anyone want to add? Sudikshna?
Not actually. I mean, everything is covered, but since now everyone has, everyone has elaborated on the Competition Commission, consumer welfareism. So I would say that Section 4 of Competition Act talks about abuse of dominant position, and nowadays it has been used a lot in all, not just here, in all antitrust regimes. For example, German Bundeskartel we have, and I think the Facebook example is going to be perfect example, the intersection between Competition Act and consumer welfareism, where the German Bundeskartel were quite confused that whether it's a consumer issue or a competition issue. So from India's perspective, I think that including Reliance Jio and their legislation about consumer welfareism in quotes. So holistically, if we understand free market regulation is just a tint towards consumer welfareism so that one cannot be dominant amongst others. Yeah.
Good points raised by all of you. So now moving on to the next question. So this is actually even more interesting, and this should be the the most interesting part of the debate, and that is who should regulate the free market and to what extent. Shreya, do you want to add some points in this?
Hi, can I go ahead?
Yeah, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. So according to me, the question itself, I think, has a lot of answers. So as far as India is concerned, let's start with this. We have went through this, socialist mixed economic model, and post independence, this was the only, tool that we had to regulate our economy, because we were on the verge of being the poorest, state in the world, and in fact, pre-liberalization, pre-LPG as well. So my point here is that as someone, you know as I put forward in my earlier answers, that it's not just the government which does that. We have international organization, and in fact today itself we have WTO and everything influencing our markets. I wouldn't say that they are regulating directly, but they're influencing our action in certain way that we are kind of obligated to comply with their regimes as well. So I think in India's perspective, it's the government who should regulate, and we have, I think, many of the regulators that have already been mentioned, like SEBI for listed companies, and then we have the whole regime of like merger control agreements, and whether and any M&A practices, we need to go through the due diligence process and everything. So my point here is that if these regulators wouldn't be here, then we wouldn't be able to compete in the world. And the mere fact that we are performing well in an ease of doing business or global competitive indexes and other indexes altogether, I suppose that these regulators are not just regulating in a way that is benefiting to consumers or any of the parties here, but at the same time setting a stage where India itself can showcase to be a economy which is growing and which is competitive on the world stage in all these fields. So yeah.
Great point, Sudipshan. Go ahead, Soumya.
While I do agree with what Sutishna just said, that regulation is actually a critical part of bringing us to a global stage, but I think that there is this need for, economizing the means and limiting the scope of regulation. Say, for example, there is no balance between effective control and certain level of autonomy. So, and this balance is necessary because the decisions that are subject to regulation, they can have ripple effects on other decisions that are not directly regulated, which makes it kind of difficult to predict and manage the ultimate outcomes. For example, in the energy sector, the regulatory bodies oversee the electricity generation and distribution process to ensure fair pricing. And they also mandate that a certain percentage of electricity must come from renewable sources to promote sustainability. However, this regulation affects decisions made by multiple utility companies also. So if the cost of renewable energy production is high, utilities might increase prices for consumers, potentially impacting the affordability. So the balance between getting in investments for new ventures with also balancing the needs and demands of the consumers, that is the right balance that we are not finding. And I think that would come through voluntary cooperation, and the voluntary cooperation among decision makers is not necessary, but among those who are directly involved in the market, like I'd say something like a cartel which understands better the things at the root, would be more necessary than just having like just the regulatory body having an upper hand.
Yes, Jason.
To specifically answer your point with respect to who should regulate, I strongly believe that, for example, India, the primary regulator for the financial markets is the Securities and Exchange Board of India. For the economic market, sort of to say, it is the Competition Commission of India, both being statutory bodies deriving their powers from an act which has been passed by the representatives of the people. So here I would like to point out that those in parliament, they sort of to say have to keep in mind both perspectives, that is of the people and also of the businesses, because to make India a more investable country, they have to have business friendly laws. That has also been the mandate of the present government, the ease of doing business. And for this balance to be found, I think while the power still has to remain with the government, stakeholders, as I believe Soumya just mentioned, stakeholders have to be consulted and taken care of in all of the discussion. However, I still believe that certain sectors, such as the environment sector, here specific upper hand can be given to, let's say, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, because the requirement of protecting the environment is probably much higher at this present stage of wherein we are entering into global warming and climate change. The need for protection of the environment is much higher than probably the need to facilitate commerce. Therefore, I believe it is a subjective answer. There, we cannot have a fixed answer with respect to who should be regulating.
Yes, Sanya.
I think when it comes to specifically India, in the context of India, the question of who should regulate the market and to what extent is really complex, and it would involve a balance between libertarian principles and the practical needs of a diverse and populous nation like India. And as Chetan mentioned, I think the commission should be receptive and responsive to comments from stakeholders so that they can make the regulatory revisions to address address the changing market forces. For instance, sectors with natural monopolies like utilities might require regulatory oversight to balance both efficiency and consumer welfare. And also, I feel when the regulatory fixes extend beyond simply correcting the problem, that often leads to upsetting the balance of forces in the rest of the market. So, such regulations might inadvertently favor certain market players or maybe limit competition or lead to an unintended consequence and ultimately harm the consumers itself.
Yes, thank you so much. So, like, just to add my own points. So even I have a very similar point of view. And for answering the question as to who should regulate the free market, even I strongly believe that the government must regulate the market in our country, at least for India. And to answer for the fact that, and till what extent, I would say that I strongly feel that the government must come in only when the interest of the customers are consumers or the customers are actually exploited. So I strongly feel that only if there is a problem in the market itself, only then the government or other authorities must come in. So this was my point of view. And so now we actually moved on to the final question of the of this debate, and that is like, what are the pros and cons of the free market regulation? So it would actually be great if you could condense your points, since the meeting will actually be ending in just 5 or 6 minutes. So go ahead, anyone.
To say my concluding points, I would just like to briefly mention quickly the positives of sort of free market regulation, and somebody else could possibly then add on. So first and foremost, as I had mentioned at the very beginning, consumer protection, that is to ensure that customers and consumers are not exploited and have access to safe and quality products. That is, we don't forget about the quality in the pursuance of a free market, wherein subpar quality products are being produced and just put into the economy. Thereafter, there is competition promotion, because so as to prevent monopolies. That is, so that we don't end up finishing the free market as we know it. There is a tendency between the top players to come together and form a sort of oligopoly or a monopoly, and essentially erase the benefits that we would have got out of a free market. Thereafter, there is environmental and social protection. I think we've discussed about it enough. And lastly, it would be market stability, that is to prevent excessive risk taking and financial crises, as we have also seen earlier. The example of the 2008 global crisis was because the subpar home loan industry was heavily under-regulated at that point in time. And that is one thing that we need to avoid in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chetan. So Rishabh and Sanya, just condense your points, so we just have a little bit of time. Yes. First,
So just to add
followed by
to
Sania and Soumya. Yes, go ahead.
yeah, so just to add to Chetan's point, like there can definitely be the tendencies for firms to like create monopolies or oligopolies, which is where government intervention is very important. So there's that. It creates a stable market system, and in an economy like this, it's a thing about survival of the fittest. And for one firm having the incentive to do better than the other, again, as Chetan mentioned, they could just have disregard for the public and not just create the best products. So there's that. And there could be the possibilities of overproduction in the economy, which could lead to recessions and all of that stuff. And all in all, it's a very hypothetical system where everything falls into place in a totally free market economy, and maybe wealth would not be distributed equally. And yeah, that's about it.
Yes, thank you so much. Sania and Soumya. Yes.
I feel the positives have been correctly, underscored by Chetan and Rishabh both, that competitive markets would ensure the resources are allocated to their highest valued users and create the, greatest benefit for consumers. I'd like to underscore a negative, wherein I'd like to quote someone from, like, I would like to quote Frederick Hayek from his book, The Road to Serfdom, in which he correctly says that government regulation is a slippery slope towards totalitarianism. At its best, it will, hurt the efficiency, and at its worst, it is a road to totalitarianism where the government completely squashes the economic and political freedom.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Soumya?
My point is actually related to the allocative efficiency thing. So I think, like, for example, even when the government does price regulation, the price regulation takes into account two things. One of them is efficiency, and second is the capital. But I think this efficiency is a constantly changing thing. So say, for example, the upcoming technology. So as we have more development and we have increasing dependence on technology, I think the efficiency is changing with the advancing technology. And this makes it very difficult for the regulators to know where a firm's allocatively efficient point is. And this is largely due to asymmetric information. So I think that is where it comes towards inefficiency, and the regulations, are not doing that great now. And secondly, I think there is a lag in the adjustment that they are doing to the inflation that is happening. So most data that the government is using is data from 2 years prior to what is the current situation. So because of that, there is not enough like adjustment for the inflation, which eats away profits in the long run. So I think things like those, if those inefficiencies are not cured in the system, then the regulations will not do us great good in the future.
Thank you so much for your points, Soumya, Rishabh, and also Sania. And like hope all of us had actually get something to gain in, at least with in perspective of at least of knowledge and what does free market regulation mean. So thank you so much for joining in this debate. So have a great day. Thank you so much.